And there we go. So, I am here. It is just me and the person who I've proclaimed as the podfather of Comics in Motion. I said that Chris was the podfather as well, but he was like, nope, it's definitely Dave because he organises everything. So I think Chris is like the pod uncle or something, or maybe the pod stepfather. But,
creepy pod uncle, I say.
That's the creepy pod uncle. That's good. If Chris is listening, which I'm sure he won't be, then that's what I'll call him from now on. I'll blame you for it. But it's just the two of us. Had a couple of people bail, but that's, life gets in the way sometimes, so it's completely fine. It's just last week it was 5 people, which was quite manic to host, so now it's just the two of us. I don't even need to host, really. I just have to have a conversation with you, which is delightful. So obviously you were on episode 1, and this is your second appearance on the little Boba Fett thing. So just in brief, what have you thought of, obviously you gave your thoughts on episode 1, so episode 2 and the last episode, number 3, is quite contentious among fans. So what were your thoughts on episode 2 and 3 before we get into episode 4?
I think I'm still coming from the same place that I was in episode 1. I just love to be here. And again, it comes from that first time that I went to the cinema to watch Return of the Jedi. And you've got that whole opening, we're on Tatooine, we're in Jabba's palace and all of that. And I just love to be on this world. Now, I can understand why other people are like, come on, when's something going to happen? And Boba Fett is a bit crap, isn't he? He's back to Return the Jedi Boba Fett. He's not this badass that we saw in Mandalorian. But I love it. I mean, I am starting to get that feeling of, all right, something more could happen here. But I'm still just really enjoying it, to be honest. Now, what I will call out is the Vespers, the polished, with what I don't know because water's so sparse.
Yeah, the street rats as well.
Yeah, it was just such a Disney-fied piece of nonsense. It seemed really out of character for the whole series, for what we've seen in Boba Fett, but also what we'd seen in The Mandalorian before. All of that seems so faithful to the grittiness, the worn-in feeling that you get with those original Star Wars movies and what we saw in The Mandalorian. I just think that was so out of character. I still don't get it, and I'm still kind of hoping they go back and digitally touch that up, and they scuff up the bikes or something. I mean, even if they scuffed up the bikes and made them look like, they've been in a sandy place for the last 10 years or whatever, that would be okay. I still think the characters, the kids, were, a bit Disney, weren't they? They've got this they've got Boba Fett turning up. And what did they call it? They called him something which was really respectful. And I'm thinking, these are little street rats. They should have no respect for anyone.
Yeah.
So that bit irked me, but I still enjoyed the episode as a whole. But if anything, that was the worst bit for me.
Yeah, I found that because I've been thinking about it, and I've seen a lot of people talking about it online, and there a lot of people basically whinging online. I was like, the whole episode in general was good. I stand by that. I just think, and the Vesper design, I haven't necessarily got a problem. I know it's meant to be a homage to American Graffiti, but I'm always like, if you're going to homage to anything, it needs to work in the universe, not just be this weird, disjointed thing. And I completely agree with you. I was like, the design of the Vespers, I think, were a bit over the top, but that's fine. They're cyberpunky kind of kids, so I would understand that. But it was the fact they were so clean, literally a minute after having a conversation, that water is so expensive and sparse. I'm just like, so how are you cleaning this? I mean, if there was an offshoot comment of just like that old guy, Stephen Root's character, who's selling them the water at extortionate prices, if he said something like, and all they do is use the water to clean their bikes anyway, I'd be like, okay, that makes sense. And then by the end of the world's slowest chase, if they were then dusty after that, I'd be like, oh, this all makes sense now. Yeah, they look a bit Disney-ish, but in the universe it makes sense. But they were just like, oh yeah, we've got these ridiculous, they're the cleanest things I've ever seen in Star Wars. For on a planet that's a dust planet with no water. And I'm just like, but how? And then they do the whole dirt track race thing, and then you're like, at the end they're still clean. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. That's the bit that annoyed me. The race I thought was a bit crap, but I was just like, that comes with it. But
I think the look of the bikes is almost like the prequels, isn't it? When you look at the original trilogy, everything's worn and gritty. And then the prequels, it was showing off these new CGI techniques and everything. So it all looked nicer, cleaner, newer. So I think that's what made it jar quite so much. I think having the mirrors on a speed bike, it's just utterly ridiculous for me. But I predict, Mike, there's going to be a comic which explains that these Vespers are made out of a precious metal which never gets dusty or never fade. The color never fades or anything.
Yeah,
there has to be some kind of plot hole plug-in that's going to happen.
That normally happens. Yeah, whenever they mess something up, like Rise of Skywalker was the key one for that, where it was like, oh god, like they released it, a lot of people weren't happy, and like, okay, so we've got the expanded edition of the book that explains everything about Palpatine being a clone, his son being actually a clone of him, and all that sort of hand wavy nonsense, and it was just like, okay, oh, and then here's a few comics to explain this part and this part and this part. And it's like, I'm happy we've got that, but it shouldn't need that. But we'll see. I did think that, obviously, prequels, they're all shiny and stuff, but a lot of it comes from, like, a Naboo senator, someone who's very rich and affluent from, in Coruscant, there's no dust necessarily apart from fumes from cars, so it kind of makes sense in that regard. But yeah, my favorite genre is a subgenre of sci-fi, which is dirty sci-fi. I always say that term. I love the original trilogy of Star Wars for dirty sci-fi. I love District 9, Elysium, those sorts of films, which is, it's gritty, it's not chrome, and that's one of the reasons why Star Trek doesn't. I don't mind Star Trek, but like a lot of that is quite clean ships and very nice uniforms and that sort of stuff. And I'm like, no, I want scruffy, dirty, Millennium Falcons falling apart, barely functioning, because operating a ship of that caliber that you're also living in, it's like having a house. No, very few people, unless they're like really rich, have a house where everything works perfectly. There's normally like the guttering's a bit off, or the cabinet doors falling off a little bit. So you repair that and something else goes wrong. And it's like, if you don't have loads of money, you can't repair all these things. So I like that element, but yeah, the clean Vespers were a bit much. But the new episode that we just watched, chapter 4, The Gathering Storm, it's called, which I would say, I think this is probably my favourite episode so far, I think. And I'm like you, whereas like even at the parts of this where I'm enjoying the least, I'm still enjoying the fact I'd rather have something from Star Wars that is primarily good with a bit of meh bits, rather than just not have anything. I think that's what a lot of Star Wars fans need to kind of learn, is like, look, either just don't watch it and don't be offended, or be happy that you've got stuff that isn't always going to land. That's just part of it. But as long as in broad strokes it's doing well, I'm still happy with that. So with this episode in particular, like, how do you feel about this in as a whole? And then we'll kind of generally go through the plot.
I enjoyed it again, but I got the feeling more than any other episode that this was like the Mandalorian a lot of the times, in that it was very episodic.
Yes.
And it's almost like playing a level in a video game. You've got to complete these different tasks, and then you get to the end, and that task is complete now, that chapter's done, and now he's on to the next task. Mandalorian felt very much like that to me, and that's what this episode felt like. It's like, right, I've got to rescue Fennec and save her, and now I've got to go and break in. I've got to go and do a whole heist piece as well. And then we get to the end, and it's like, right, we've got to hire some other muscle, and that's going to be next week's adventure. So yeah, I enjoyed it. I've got a few problems with how Fennec was saved, but I don't know if we want to get into that now or get into it a bit later.
I mean, that's more or less like from the start. I mean, you've got pretty much the start is looking at Jabba's palace. He chills with Banthas, and then he finds Fennec Shand. So realistically, we can just get straight into that element of it. So what were your sort of thoughts with the way he saved Fennec then? What was your thoughts?
Well, we start off in the same way, don't we? That Boba Fett he's been in and out of the Bacta tank all this way, and that's a good kind of way for him to have dreams, and that's that explains why we keep going back in time and remembering all this stuff. Now, when Luke Skywalker had his hand chopped off in Empire Strikes Back, he ended up in the tank because he's had his bloody his hand chopped off, and he needs to recover. and you leave, and then he's still recovering, and you imagine he's recovering for a while longer. He hasn't got out of bed at the end of the movie. So you can kind of get that in this world, people have body parts replaced by, I was going to say animatronics, but yeah, cybernetics. I get that. But in a shitty old equivalent of a tattoo parlor, he's basically going to rip out her guts. He's going to replace her whole midsection in a very unsterile environment. There's no back to tank anywhere, so she can do some recovering. And then you're thinking, well, you put a bunch of metal inside you, your body is going to reject it first and foremost. And then again, you can do some hand wavy stuff and say, oh, well, the back to tank helps the flesh and the metal kind of bond without infection and all that sort of stuff. I can get that, but just shoves a bunch of metal in there in a non-sterile environment, and then she just wakes up in the desert. So there is no recovery at all. And so, saying that, us Star Wars fans, we should just get over some nitpicky things and, just get on with it and enjoy it and appreciate we've got it. I think that more than anything in the series, even more than the Vespers, the ridiculously well waxed and polished Vespers, I was just like, that's just ridiculous. You've got a whole recovery mechanism in this universe set up. We know how people recover. And you've just said, nah, she's all right. She's just full of cybernetics now, and she's that badass. She doesn't need it. She's just going to be okay.
That's a very good point. I hadn't really thought of that. I did think it was a bit weird when Boba was like, you're going to cover that up. And then I know we saw it in Mandalorian, so we had to be able to see it. But it was like, oh, you're going to cover it up. What? And hide that beautiful machinery. And I'm like, she didn't choose to have this. You're saving her life. She has to have this. It's not a choice. But I was thinking as well, I was like, yeah, wouldn't dust on Tatooine get in there? Wouldn't you want at least... I thought they'd put like a glass, or what do they call it? They call glass something else in Star Wars, like transparasteel, I think they call it, when it's meant to be what Starship windscreens are made out of.
Oh, yeah.
But I can't remember if that's Legends or not. But regardless, I was thinking, they're going to put like a see-through thing over it, and then you'll still, when she lifts up her top, when you see it in Mando, you'd still be able to see everything. It's just that it would have a casing. But there's no casing, and you can see like the lip of her skin. And it's like, now that I'm thinking about it, because when I watched it, I was like, oh, this is how she got the middle section. That's cool. And, the mod shop thing is kind of cool. But now that you've said it, I'm just like, once again, I mean, I suppose great of hindsight, we're not the showrunners, but I'm like, yeah, if they'd have just had him spray her with Bacta spray and mentioned, oh, this is top of the line Bacta spray, and then just given Boba Fett, like, here's a couple of pills or something, this is going to really hurt her for a while, but if you just give her these as soon as she wakes up, it will get rid of most of the pain. And if they said something like, or it will make it so the metal settles with her skin or something better, that would be fine. But as you said, it's just one of those things where it's like, I think the problem that Star Wars has a lot of the time, and this happens with a lot of shows and movies, is just like 90% of problems in movies and films that are plot holes can normally be solved by one line of dialogue. And it's just that no one watched this and went, Fennec recovered a bit quick. Do you want to just add a line in just quickly? And no one was like, no. So I get your point there. It makes sense.
Yeah, and like I say, I mean, if you've not picked it up, maybe it is one of those things I'm just more sensitive to. But
now you said it, it makes sense.
It seems to me that they do such a great job elsewhere of making sure it's consistent with the universe. That just struck me as, well, okay, I can go along for the story, and it doesn't really hinder my enjoyment of the episode. But yeah, it doesn't make sense when I sit back and think about it. Yeah,
that is an odd one. But yeah, it's one of those things. This episode was, although it was probably my favorite, I think, because it kept moving quite a lot. Although it wasn't top tier for me necessarily, I think this one and probably the second episode were probably my favorite ones. But I think the second one was the one that had the train heist in it, which was cool, but that was just something we've seen 100 times before. So I think it was, and then the last one had the Vespa bit, and then the world's slowest car chase, and then this one, it was just kind of like, here's a few throwbacky stuff, the Sarlacc pit, Jabba's palace, all these sort of things, and here's how he got his ship, here's how Fennec was recovered. It's kind of explaining the questions we had, which I think I appreciate that element, because where I'm a bit of a lore junkie, I'm always like, why did this happen? Why did that happen? And so they were like, here's explanations to basically everything. And I was like, oh, okay. I suppose that's cool.
Do you not think it's a bit like Solo, the movie?
Yes.
It's like, oh, there's all these open questions, and we can't possibly not answer all of those. So here we go. We're going to show you absolutely everything, so you know exactly how he got this. How did him and Fennec, gather this relationship, or become friends or whatever? How did he get his ship back? How does he find out where his armor is? That's going to be in the series later on, I imagine. But we don't always need to know this. I think so. So the other week on VHS Strikes Back, we went back and we watched the 1964 Goldfinger with Sean Connery. I don't know if you've ever watched that.
Years ago. I can remember almost nothing, but you can spoil it. It's a very old film.
I wasn't going to go on about spoilers, but I've not watched it for years and years as well. But what I noticed was, it was really interesting. The start of the movie is like finishing off a previous mission.
Oh, yeah.
Now, we don't know what that mission was, or we see, the highlights. We see that he blows up something and, gets the girl. And then he goes on, and then you have all the exposition about the next mission. And what I think that did brilliantly was it just says that, look, you're seeing this bit, but there's loads of stuff that's happened before, and there's loads of stuff that's going to happen in the future. You're not going to see everything, but you're just going to have to imagine, like, what actually happened there. So I don't know if I like as much as you the need to like plug all these different gaps. You just have to know, he and Fennec are friends. She's a bounty hunter. He's a bounty hunter. I don't need to know any more than that, really. And then maybe him finding the ship. Okay, that would have been useful, because if you're thinking he was in the Sarlacc pit, and then suddenly when he turns up in Mandalorian, he's got the ship. Okay, maybe explain that, but I don't know. I don't think everything needs to be explained.
Yeah, I mean that's a fair comment. I mean, with me, because I get asked by people in the podcasting realm and everyone else always asking me questions about why do you think this is and why do you think that is. It's quite nice for me when there's an actual answer. I think with Star Wars exclusively, I quite like that. But it's like with Han and Chewie, like they're in debt to Jabba the Hutt. That's the consistent plot throughout the original trilogy. We don't know why. They're releasing a comic book series, which is coming out in May, which is going to explain why. And I'm a bit like, but we know how this ends. We know Han and Chewie don't die, obviously. We know by the end of it that he basically just released spice that he was carrying for Jabba because the Imperials got to him. So I'm like, we know in general broad strokes, but I'm not very excited for this series because it's going to be 5 issues. I'm going to obviously pick it up and read it. I'm like, do we need that much more Han Solo? Like, that isn't a Solo 2 or something? Like, do we really need... Like, I either want young Han Solo, or maybe sort of... I'm reading a book at the moment called Last Shot, and it's Lando and Han about 2-3 years after Return of the Jedi. That's quite interesting. I quite like seeing their dynamic after Return of the Jedi, and Han keeps messing with Lando, saying you betrayed us at Bespin, etc., etc. And it's like that element I quite like, because that's an unexplored era of Star Wars generally, and it's quite interesting seeing Han as a character evolve. We saw him in Solo, we saw him in A New Hope. We generally can see what happened between that. We don't need the exact specifics of what kind of ship he was flying when he lost the spice to the Imperials. So I am in that kind of boat where it's like sometimes less is more, but if they're going to get into the minutiae of details like Fennec being repaired, it is kind of like, well, in this scenario, less is. Sometimes you want the details and sometimes you don't. And it's kind of that balance, I suppose.
Yeah. I think I thought Solo, just like you said, I thought he jettisoned some cargo because he was going to get boarded by the Empire. Yeah, that was it. That's all I need to know.
Exactly. Yeah, there doesn't need to be a whole story behind it necessarily. But I was actually thinking with the ship part, one thing that did jar with me with the ship part, like I want to clarify, I like the episode, but it's definitely not flawless. Is did no one else fly the ship in the couple of years that he was gone? What I was expecting him was to get on the ship and be like, and Fennec say something like, "I'm surprised no one flew this," and he just goes, "Oh, you can't access it without the chain codes, or you can't access it without this specific thing," or even him just going in there and pressing thing, and there being just a padlock symbol or something, and him typing something in, and then go, "Welcome back, Boba," not even saying anything, but the screen opens up. But he literally gets in there, sits down, pulls one lever, and it starts up, and you're like, Right, this is Boba Fett's ship. We know it's Boba Fett's
Yeah.
ship. It seems to work fine. He clearly knew where it was because he parked it there. What, and Bib Fortuna took over Jabba, and they had this big area with no other ships in this whole dockyard area. And they were like, oh, that's Boba Fett. So we better not touch that, actually. Even though we think he's dead because the Sarlacc bit. Because Fennec literally says, I thought Boba was dead. And he was like, oh, I escaped, whatever. So I'm just like, that's one thing that always jars me a little bit with Star Wars, because sometimes you get people nick each other's ships, and sometimes you don't. And I'm like, there's no keys in Star Wars. When people land a ship and it's open, people can just walk in and, in theory, fly it if you know how to pilot a ship. So I'm just a bit like, when they didn't do that, I was like, oh, Boba was going to say, oh, Bib's messed around with my ship, or there's no fuel left, or something. But it's like, oh no, the ship's perfectly fine, it flies fine, it's just a bit difficult to get out, and I'm now taking it back. And I'm like, why
this crime lord didn't bother to sell my ship or anything, or no
Boba
Jawas.
Think about the iconic thing of Boba Fett's ship, how much in universe they could sell for that, especially, and there's, no one cares. And he says, like, a passing comment when Fennec says, because obviously he finds Fennec, and that's the first series of Mandalorian. And Mandalorian takes place with series 1 or 2 is around a year-ish, thereabouts. And so between Return of the Jedi and Mando is about 5 years-ish, 4 to 5. So you're thinking he's probably with the Tusken, like, for 3 years maybe, which seems like a stretch. But even then, you're like, so even if the ship was there for months, you'd think someone would touch it. But for years... How is that the case?
Doesn't make sense, does it?
No.
I mean, in terms of starting, I mean, you could say it might have been like biometrics or something, so it recognizes that it's Boba Fett.
Yeah.
In which case, any clone you would think could go in there and start it up.
Yeah, potentially. But once again, it's just one thing that just wasn't said. I would just, and that's one thing. But I think with Star Wars, there's certain parts of Star Wars they specifically don't really mention. There's a couple of, like, they hate timelines. They hate giving times for things. Because once you say, this definitely happened 2 months after that happened, then you can't really play around with the story. But when you say, it's about 5 years, it's about this, and a year in Star Wars is kind of ambiguous anyway, because a year...
It's like dog years.
Yeah. It's like, oh, well, a year on that planet is different to a year on this planet. So in that regard, it's always a little bit hand-wavy, but...
And how do you measure a year with 2 suns?
That's a very good point. And also with the 2 suns, like, is there one sun in the middle and then one sun in a different part of the galaxy that still has enough light to shine, but you're not orbiting? Or are you orbiting both, or is one sun orbiting the other sun? But that, like, it does raise a lot of questions.
I think we're definitely into the territory of probably we're overthinking this one.
I would be in agreement with you. So let's rein it back in. Let's talk about some of the other stuff we liked about this. So one thing I did like, actually, is it's showing that Boba likes animals, which I quite like. When he had the bantha and he was petting the bantha, I was like, that's just nice. I just like that.
I wanted my own bantha then.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Megan, I think, is watching the episode right now as we record. And I said, there's a couple of things in there I think you'll really like. And the bantha stuff I thought was very cute. And it's like, this adds to Boba, obviously he had connection with the Tuskens and stuff, but it adds to his Rancor relationship, which I'm intrigued by as well. So we've got that. We've got Fennec. So we've basically spoken about the Fennec and Boba flashbacky stuff. And although there was one little other minor gripe I want to clarify. People always think I hate Star Wars almost because I've just got so many gripes about it. But there's one thing where he literally says, in about 5 minutes after, he says to Fennec, it's really easy to do something when everyone already thinks you're dead. And I was like, okay, cool. But 5 minutes before that, he holds the LEP droid, the little bunny droid, by the throat and says, I'm Boba
Fett. Yeah.
And I'm like, so are you trying to hide the fact you're alive, or are you telling everyone because it seems like he tells everyone he meets that his name is Boba Fett. Yeah. And then says to Fennec, no one knows I'm about. I'm like, but you just told a random droid that you could have broke, or it just switched itself off, which I thought was quite funny. But
I did like the... So it was the smaller one, wasn't it, that appeared later? But the thing that's like General Kenobi sort of
like Grievous almost.
Grievous, yeah.
I
wondered. I have to think that is a direct homage to.
I thought that. I wrote that down.
Yeah,
I really liked that. And
I mean, we didn't see the little droid that he announced he was Boba Fett to. He seemed to throw in the trash can.
Yeah,
but then. He was in the Jabba's palace later. So I guess he was running round when he was discussing with the the other tribal leaders and stuff.
Well, I guess that was the time jump, wasn't it? So I
guess he threw it in the bin, but then
we kind of placed it, I suppose. So maybe it's just like, I'll leave you in here for later, and then he when he was checking around, he's like, oh yeah, I remember this droid. Let's just flick it back on.
Switch him back on. Yeah. That probably makes sense, that bit.
But yeah, I did like the knife droid things. That was cool. I also like when Bo was flying his ship, which they seem to be calling the Fire Spray now, which is the make of the ship, because I think Disney are just staying away from the name Slave One, which I don't really care about, to be honest. I know a lot of people are quite triggered by that, but I'm like, I don't care what he calls it. If you change the name of the Millennium Falcon, yes, I'll be angry. But they never say the word Slave One in any movie. It's just in expanded content and stuff. So
yeah,
I'm not fussed about it.
I mean, we're a couple of white guys, aren't we? It's not...
Yeah.
We're not going to be triggered by it. So
No.
If they want to steer clear of it, I'm cool with that.
Yeah, I'm not fussed about that. But him shooting the Nikto gang and killing all them, I was like, yeah, fair play. So, the other story...
It seemed a little bit... At the end of Superman 2, right, there's in Superman 2, which you must have seen...
At some point in my life.
He basically turns himself human because he wants to shag Lois. I mean, there is no other explanation for it. So then they sleep together, and then they go to this diner, and he gets his ass kicked, and he realizes, being a human's a bit shit because you can get your ass kicked. So then he marches back up, to the Fortress of Solitude, gets his powers back, and then he takes on Zod and all his cronies and that. And at the end, he goes back to that same diner. And, he basically beats up this hillbilly guy who'd beat him up before. And I'm like, but you're Superman. You don't need to prove yourself to this hillbilly. And it's a bit like stepping on an ant or something like that, isn't it? It just seemed over the top for me. And that's what this felt like as well. And he's basically got his massive Boba Fett ship, whatever they're calling it. And he obliterates this biker gang. It just seemed like... Well,
I suppose they killed all the Tuskens. I think that's the idea.
I think it was just the way of doing it, though. I mean, maybe it just felt wrong to me. It just felt like, someone like bringing a gun to a knife fight kind of thing.
I suppose one would argue that they took blasters to a gaffy stick fight where they killed the Tuskens.
But I mean, all right. They happened to draw that symbol, and he found. I mean, is that in all of Tatooine? Is that they're only that one little gang? Is that all of them?
I think that's what you're meant to believe, because he goes to that bar, doesn't he? And then they're the Nikto gang, and Nikto are a species, and so that's and they have the biker jackets. I presume it is just a gang, but I don't know.
Yeah.
But
I'll let him off then. If he knows for absolute sure that was definitely them,
yeah,
all right.
Although
maybe
I did find he shot all the lasers at them, and then there's one speeder bike left, and he shot a missile, and I'm like, that, like, from what I understand, like blaster bolts, they are either a charging battery or something like that, or then they're quite inexpensive blasters because everyone has one. But missiles in a ship probably cost a bit of money. I know Boba makes a comment saying he's got loads of credits, but I'm like, if you've just wiped out everyone with this one weapon, you still have this charge left, and you're like, no, with the last one I'm going to shoot a missile. I'm like, what? If you're going to shoot a missile, start with that, or don't use it. What? Why?
It just looks cool, though, doesn't it?
It's like a video game. It's like a video game when you've just charged up one of your special powers and you've beaten everyone up, and you're like, I'm going to use the overkill move on this last enemy in the area. Let's punch him through a wall.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? Because we all play video games now, and it's, you can imagine this sequence, and like I say, this whole episode felt like the level of a video game, and you've only got a finite number of those before you have to pick up some more.
Yeah.
So, maybe that's the thing as well. Whereas years gone by, you wouldn't have cared.
No.
Now you're like, I've only got 7 of these. Once they're gone, they're gone.
Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, what do you think about the Sarlacc sort of bit?
I started this episode off saying how much I liked it, and all I've done is bitch and moan about it. But this, more than anything, I just didn't get.
Right.
Again, I'm going to draw another parallel here. I don't know if you ever watched the old Transformers cartoons, and it used to bug me as a kid.
I did. I've seen a few of the episodes, but I can't say I was ever an avid watcher.
So basically, Megatron was this huge robot, and I've
seen the movies, so I've got a vague understanding.
The live action or the The
live
animated,
action, not the good animation one.
Yeah, so in the old cartoons, I'll see if I can dig out a trailer after we've finished. He's this big hulking robot, and then he changes into a gun, but the gun like fits in the hand of another transformer. So he's a massive gun. He's got this massive cannon on his hand, on his arm, and then he changes into a little gun that the other like Starscream or one of the other Transformers basically shoot. And I'm like, but I don't get it. You've already got a massive cannon, and then you change into a smaller gun. But it's the physics of it. It's like he's massive, and then he's this small gun. And even as a kid, it just really wound me up. With this, when Boba's approaching with the ship, you can see this tiny little. I mean, obviously, if you stood next to it, it wouldn't be tiny, but this Sarlacc pit opening. And you're looking at the massive ship, and he's kind of, he's leaning into it. So you've got the glass being the closest to the mouth, and I was just like, what is your plan there? Because if you fell right down at the bottom, you're not actually going to get in there. Reality is, it was a way to create a bit of drama, so where the Sarlacc's grabbing them and trying to pull them down and whatever, but I don't think it'd have even been able to pull them down anyway. It's too fucking big to get in the hole. So yeah, that wasn't my favorite bit either.
Fair enough. Yeah, I thought I thought it did go on a bit, and there was parts where I was like, it's just a little moment here and there which seems a tad unnecessary. Although I did like the little, like, some of the humor in this I think is really good, and some of it I don't think is quite landing. But I did really like it when they'd finished and killed the Sarlacc and whatever, and then he was like, "Don't touch my buttons," and it was just like that little thing, and I was like, "That's quite funny." Even though obviously she saved his life basically, but I liked that little moment. That's the Star Wars humor I like from the original trilogy, rather than slapsticky jokes from the prequels. Yeah. I think that's that part. But I enjoyed that. But if we move on to basically sort of modern day in air quotes, where we've got Boba Fett, he's been fully healed by the Bacta and stuff, and then he heads to the it's not quite a casino, it's like a bar place with Jennifer Beal in it, and Black Chrysanthemum's there. It's
like some sort of fancy casino. I'm almost wondering if it's like a gentleman's bar.
Yeah, it does, with the Twi'leks walking around very scantily clad, and especially Jennifer Beal was wearing, she kind of gave me the vibe of like I can compare it to Westworld, when you've got sort of all the prostitutes, and you've got the head prostitute who's very sophisticated and she's in charge of it all, but you can still pay to have sex with her. So it's still that weird. Maeve was like that in Westworld, who's a cracking character, but I kind of got that vibe from Jennifer Beal. I was like, you're this powerful woman, and I was like, but you're wearing what seems like a push-up bra and then a nice little window so we can see your cleavage, and I'm like, what is that for? Is it a gentleman's club? Are these Twi'leks for sale? Because a lot of the time in Star Wars, Twi'leks are, like, I mean, in Return of the Jedi is one of them. They are basically humans, but a lot of the time they are seen as either strippers or prostitutes or those sorts of things. So I was like, all of your fellow species in the establishment you own are all not wearing very much, and you come out wearing something very elegant, but also something showing certain parts of you, which I'm not saying is a problem, but that vibe of like, is it a gentleman's club? You can drink, you can gamble. What else can you do there on Tatooine? It's I don't know.
I mean, the thing is, Star Wars is mostly a sausage fest anyway, isn't it? There's very few women in it. So the fact that it's mostly blokes in this place probably doesn't mean it's a gentleman's club. It just means it's Star Wars. But I mean, the best thing about it is just you can see that Black Chrysanthemum is just stewing, isn't he?
Yeah.
And he's looking ominous, and he is just waiting to finish his drink and then pick a fight. Yep. And then, it's just showing us that this is, a bit of a badass. We'd heard right from A New Hope where Solo tells 3PO that, Wookiees rip people's arms off if they're not happy. But we never saw it from Chewie. He's a big cuddly bear, isn't he? Unless you threaten harm. Whereas Black Chrysanthemum is just a badass. And he's not just seeking revenge or anything. Sometimes he just wants to punch stuff. I'm here for it.
Yeah, I loved that part. I thought with all the Black Chrysanthemum stuff, the flashback stuff I thought was was interesting. I think I liked it a lot more because I feel like the last episode, especially the end, was such a drag. And when I rewatched it with Megan, I liked it even less, the last episode, with all the Vespers and stuff, and the race annoyed me even more. So I think that with this one, where there was the odd little thing, with Fennec and stuff, and you said it annoyed you slightly more, but for me, I was like, there's little bits that are a little bit like, meh, but I'm used to that with Star Wars. There wasn't anything big glaring like there was in the last episode, so I think that's what came from it. But what I like about it is that it was done in a very clever way where Trandoshans and Wookiees historically hate each other. They despise each other in the universe, and that's like people who read the comics and expanded canon and stuff. It's not overtly said a huge amount. It's just said a fair amount of times. There's the Life Day comic recently where it happens because basically Trandoshans, when the Empire took over especially, it got even worse. Trandoshans and Wookiees are both very strong beings, but Wookiees are generally more peaceful. Trandoshans are generally hunters. They worship something called the Scorekeeper, which is like this god that rewards them for killing people, basically. And so you don't generally get very many nice Trandoshans. But Trandoshans are so much stronger than pretty much every species, bar a couple. But Wookiees are very even to them. So they always clash on stuff. And when the Empire took over, the Trandoshans primarily were hired to collect Wookiees to get them as slaves for the Empire. So they've always had these tensions. So and Black Chrysanthemum, I think when he was a gladiator, which Jennifer Beal mentions, and that's detailed in the Afro comics. I think that I might be wrong here, but the Trandoshans might have been the people who forced him into the gladiator pit and were the ones who kind of turned him into, like, his brass knuckles, that's not an accessory, that's fused into his skin. So he's like this monster made to fight. And Trandoshans and Wookiees don't get along anyway. So I think it was quite good where they were like, oh, he clearly wants to pick a fight, he's got all this rage, but also there's that little thing of the extra nerds who are like, oh, but Trandoshans and Wookiees don't like each other anyway. So there's like layers that work for everyone. And I think that's why Mando worked in a lot of ways. And that element of this, I think, worked from seeing Black Chrysanthemum. I was like, I loved it.
That adds a load of layers for me. I didn't know any of that stuff about these races hating each other. It's fantastic. I mean, all I keep thinking, because we'd had a little hint even from episode 1, is where is Bosk? Is Bosk going to show up? I want to find
Bosk as well. Yeah.
So, is he going to have a bit of a showdown with Black Chrysanthemum? Because obviously the way this is going, Boba Fett offers him a job at the end of the episode, doesn't he? So even from the last episode, you could see that coming a mile off. And Boba Fett had said, I used to work for a Trandoshan. So I'd love to think that he's coming back. Obviously, if he comes back, it's nothing like Luke Skywalker coming back in Mandalorian. But it would be nice to just have that little nod, that little callback to Empire Strikes Back where we saw him.
Yeah, I would really like that because in the comics, in the War of the Bounty Hunters comics and stuff, Bosk and Boba do butt heads a little bit. They do somewhat respect each other, but when they're both going for the same job, they'll beat each other, but they won't necessarily kill each other. They'll just like try and incapacitate each other. So it's that kind of rivalry that I quite like. But with Black Chrysanthemum hating Trandoshans, I would be in agreement. I think it's the groundwork. Like what I want from the show, like I suspect they might make a second series because I was listening to a Star Wars YouTuber talk about it. Star Wars Explained, Alex and Molly, who I had on the show a while ago. And they do a Q&A every week, and I was listening to them talk about it. And they basically said, well, with Kenobi, that's a limited series. You get the one. With a lot of the Marvel shows, they're like, it's a limited series. You only get this bit. With Loki, they didn't say that. And then Loki at the end was like, oh, we're doing a second series. They haven't said with Book of Boba Fett if it is or isn't. So I don't know if they're doing a second series. And if they do, what I want it to become, ideally, is a bit fan servicey, but I think if they did it in the right way. Series 1 just established Boba and his empire growing, blah, and then eventually I'd want him to go off Tatooine in Series 2. But kind of like try and convince other bounty hunters he's worked with, like Dengar, like maybe Bosk if he doesn't pop up in this one, and some of the other bounty hunters. I want Baylor Valance to come in. He's only in the comics. He's even in the original, like, 78 comics as well. And he's a cyborg, and he's just one of my favourite comic characters. So I'm desperate for him to come into it. But I think I might be wishful thinking. But if he can convince people to not be bounty hunters and then come into conflict with them, like Dengar's a bit of a backstabber and stuff in the comics. So I'm just like, I'm hoping that if they do a second series, it's Boba Fett going out into the universe, exploring different planets, and finding lots of the people he used to work with and trying to convince them to become part of his clan, to not be bounty hunters anymore, to kind of do what Fennec Shan did. And I'm like, with Bosk, I'm certain Bosk will not want to do that. So I am hoping, like, I want them to fight. But what do you think of that? What I've just said, basically.
I have no idea. I have no idea if that's what's going to happen. The thing I found most interesting about the way this kind of ended was that there was that little musical.
I was going to mention
wasn't
that.
there? Yeah. So right after the bit where Fennec says about getting the muscle, and you have to know the right places to look, then you hear the little Mandalorian.
Yep.
And you're like, oh, this could be it. So you could join up again with the Mandalorian. So my mind was more going there. So seven episodes in this series, up to so we're over the halfway point now. So they're going to have to wrap up this whole thing with the mayor and the what are they called, the
syndicates?
The syndicate. Yeah. So he's going to have to wrap that up. So I'm guessing in the next episode, maybe I can't even remember what the guy's name is now. The Mandalorian.
Din Djarin.
Din Djarin, that's him. If he reintroduces him in the next episode, then they have, the penultimate episode is embarking on something with a big cliffhanger, and then they overcome this syndicate. That's episode 7. That is where I think it was going. And then I feel like this series is just a splinter off Mandalorian. Yeah. I think when they started The Mandalorian, they probably didn't even know that they were going to do this. And because it was so successful with the first series, and even more so with the second series, I think before they, not necessarily in the first series, but maybe before they started shooting the second series, they probably had an idea that they were going to do this.
Yeah.
So they were going to introduce Boba, and then they'd have a separate series which would fill in the blanks of how the hell did he get there? Because we all thought he was dead. So how did he get there? But I think it's just going to fall back into the Mandalorian from here.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fairly certain when Jon Favreau was asked about Book of Boba Fett, or might have been Dave Filoni, someone involved with Star Wars, I'm like 99% sure said, Book of Boba Fett's kind of like Mandalorian Series 2.5. And when I heard that, I was like, oh, that's cool. It's going to be a filler of that. I didn't really think Din Djarin would appear in it. But then in this episode, the Mandalorian music played twice. The first time was actually when before Boba finds Fennec Shand, just before he looks in the distance and sees this light. When the light happens, I don't know if it was the music, but it was a sound effect that was only Mandalorian. And I was like, okay. What was that? And then he finds Fennec, and I was like, oh, so that was the Mandalorian flying away in the Razor crest after the events of that episode. So I was like, oh, that's quite a nice little thing. And then at the end, as soon as she said we need some help and the Mando music was playing, I was like, he's going to be in it. I was like, yeah. I think like you, either he'll be. My prediction. I know a lot of the time in these shows we don't want to predict everything, but I think similarly to you. But I think Din Djarin's going to appear right at the very end of the next episode. Like the last shot is going to be like a door opening and the camera pans up, and you just see Din Djarin's mask, and he can say some sort of badass thing, and then the penultimate episode he'll be in it, or maybe he'll be like a Deus Ex Machina in the penultimate episode, like, oh no, who's going to save Boba and Fennec and Black Krrsantan now? They're in real dire straits, and then you hear a noise and everyone turns, and then you see Din Djarin walk in, and that ends, and then the finale, he's just in it. So I feel similarly to you. I think that sort of thing will probably happen. Yeah,
no, it could be. I'm all here for it. I just. The Mandalorian pretty much became the Mandalorian plus Baby Yoda, Grogu, didn't it? From the end of episode 1, they were together that whole time. So I am interested. What does Din Djarin go on to do once he's parted ways with Baby Yoda? Like, what is his purpose in life now?
Yeah, I think what a lot of people have thought is that he's going to find out what it means to be Mandalorian. Like first he thought it wasn't taking the helmet off, and then he met Bo-Katan and Boba Fett. Boba Fett doesn't really consider himself a Mandalorian, but he has the kind of bloodline of it. Bo-Katan's quite seriously a Mandalorian, but she doesn't follow the old ways. The Armorer is still about somewhere, who's the one who taught him. So I think it's him working out. I think the series is, I guess, 5 is going to be 5 series of The Mandalorian, and I'm going to guess it's going to be a build up to finding out what happened to Mandalore after the Empire destroyed it, or maybe there's going to be like the Imperial Remnant all holding out on Mandalore, because obviously that's what's explored in Rebels quite a bit, and that's how part of Rebels, without spoiling it, it kind of ends with oh, Mandalore are going to stand up against the Empire, and then Mandalorian starts, and it's like, yeah, Mandalore is fucked, and you're like, so what happened then? So I don't know if Series 3 of Mando is going to tie in maybe with the Ahsoka series somewhat, and kind of be like Sabine Wren's going to be in parts of it or not. But I think Din Djarin's going to find out what's going to be what it means to be Mandalorian, and I suspect in Series 3, for the first half of the series, Grogu won't be about, and then at some point in the second half, he'll appear again, but Mando will be on this quest to do stuff. He'll get Grogu back, and then he'll continue the quest. So I think Grogu taking him out of the pictures to kind of be like, right, what do you actually want to do, Din Djarin? And I suspect with Boba, it might be a case of he just has no money. Like, he had his ship blown up. All he's got left is the Beskar staff. Yeah. And obviously, when we last saw him, he lost Grogu. So it was like, he's got no purpose. He's got his armor, his gun, and a Beskar staff, and the Darksaber. And that's pretty much all he has. So I would not be surprised if he shows up in Book of Boba Fett just to be like, I need money. I don't really want to kill people anymore, but I'm in desperate need of something. And Boba would be like, I'll get you a ship, and that sort of stuff. So last thing, because I know we're slowly running out of time. The last thing I want to add, because we've kind of vaguely done predictions and stuff, so just to backtrack a smidge, is just what did you think of the dinner bit with him with the other syndicates and the Rancor in the cage on the floor?
I thought the Rancor was very well trained because he literally, he literally put his claws up at the moment where Boba Fett was being challenged, and so I was like, "Come on!" It was just a bit too convenient.
Yeah,
it sort of reminded me a bit. There's a. Have you watched Game of Thrones?
Yes, yeah, I've seen it all. Yeah,
yeah. So there's a moment there where young Robb Stark is trying to rally his bannermen, and these are all older guys, see much more action than him.
Yeah,
I think in the books he's like 15 or something like that. I mean, in the TV shows he's a bit older. He can grow a beard, so he must be at least north of 16. And there's a moment where one of them goes up with a knife, and then his Robb Stark's wolf attacks the bloke who pulls the knife on Robb Stark. So there was like, in that scene, there was a trigger. The wolf thought that Robb Stark was about to be attacked, and then, this wolf ends up chewing off a couple of his fingers. Whereas this was just, they were just talking normally, and basically, the other guy, I don't know what alien species he was, but he was just sort of saying what's in it for us kind of thing, or why don't we just take from you, and then the Rancor pops up and he's like, oh, I've got a Rancor monster. Well, all right, but he's down there, isn't he? So I know what he was trying to tell us. It was trying to be almost like a little threat, but it was just a bit too convenient for me. I didn't necessarily like that bit.
That makes sense. I will try and be a Star Wars apologist and try and explain it away. And I agree with you. I think it was quite convenient. I enjoyed it still. But if you look into it a bit deeper, it's a bit like, the only thing I can think of, and this would then mean, I think this would go against what the showrunners were trying to do. Boba Fett gives the Rancor some food before that happens. So the only thing I can think of that would make sense that we've seen in the show would be he gave the Rancor food, the Rancor was still hungry, and it just so happened that he did that to be like, more food, but it just happened to be at the perfect time. I don't think that's what the showrunners were doing, but that's the only real explanation I think I can give that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess he's going to have to come into it. I mean, what is the point? Unless you're Jabba the Hutt and you just want to torment and torture people, throw them down to, the Rancor, what is the point in having one? I know he said he wants to ride it, but
I think like a guard dog. I think that's kind of the thing of just like, if you have a dog in your house that you've trained to attack intruders, you're not necessarily going to go out and kill people with a German Shepherd. But if people attack you, you've got protection you've got protection. I think that's how I've kind of interpreted it, because he does like animals. He has that affinity for them and things. And if what Danny Trejo said, about them imprinting on you, which does link in the other canon content I have read, Rancors are naturally very docile. Like that's actually a common thing that's always been in Star Wars, interestingly enough. I was surprised when I heard that. But in the show, it actually makes sense to what we know already. So, yeah, I think that's what I kind of interpret it as. He's got a guard dog, and it's just a giant Rancor, and it's good. like it's a last resort almost sort of thing, and it does kind of help him. He's trying to get respect. He doesn't want people to fear him because he's murdering everyone. But it would probably be, you're probably quite less likely to attack, you know, the legendary Boba Fett who's wearing Mandalorian armor with the assassin Fennec Shand, along with the gladiator Black Chrysanthemum who's a Wookiee, and a Rancor. It's like
all these murderers.
Yeah, so you're going to need a lot to take him on. There's only 4 people basically and a few droids. You'll need a lot to take those on. So I think it's more so quality over quantity. Instead of having an army that you have to pay, you just have a Rancor as a pet that he likes animals, like a guard dog.
Yeah, I didn't really, I wasn't bought into his reasoning as well. You're saying, you know, come and join me and, you know, we'll fight the syndicate. And they're like, no. And he's like, okay, then. But can you just promise me that if they come to you, you know, maybe they offer you twice as much money or whatever, you know, just don't join in with them. Can we agree on that? Oh, yeah, sure, mate. And then there was nothing really to tie them to that deal. Yeah. Now, you could say that, okay, they must realize that the syndicate's got ambitions. If it takes over Boba Fett's patch, then they'll probably scale out from that. Yeah. But it didn't really say that. It was just like
he did actually say that. He did say that if
did he? Oh, I missed that bit.
Yeah.
Okay.
To play. Sorry, Dave. But
I'm glad, to be honest.
Yeah, he said just another thing. He was like, look, because I think when they said, why should we? He was like, well, the Pikes are not going to stop where they are. They're going to keep growing. And although they're not in your territories yet, they're going to expand into them. And Boba being like, look, you don't even have to use any resources, just don't join them. I suspect probably of the species there was Trandoshans, which were the lizard people. There's the kind of spider people with the testicles on their chin. They're called Aqualish, same species as Ponda Baba, who got his arm sliced off in A New Hope. And then I had to look up the guy at the table who's being the confrontational one. And he is a Clatoonian, is the name of that species. I'd not heard of that before. They're kind of the dog face almost.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I suspect that they will probably side with the Pikes, and then Boba will take them out and then be like, told you. That's what I think. I'm hoping this show, there's a lot of questions that get brought up, and including like the Black Chrysanthemum thing when he just let Black Chrysanthemum go. And everyone was a bit like, he's either going to come back and try and kill Boba Fett, or Boba Fett's going to go talk to him or something. And it was like, I think that's the issue with episodic stuff with Star Wars, where a lot of it is, oh, the showrunners have missed something. And then the next episode comes by and you go, oh no, that was a setup. It just didn't feel like a setup. And I'm hoping, optimistic, that that's what it's going to be.
Yeah, I think I'd have liked to have seen Boba Fett just flex his muscles a bit more, though. And, you know, put them in a position where they have to at least stand back, you know, as opposed to this watery kind of, you know, okay, just I'll fight them on everyone's behalf then. Oh, go on. You know, it's just, I'm still, I think I am, what I'm disappointed with this series is that it hasn't carried on the trajectory that we saw in Mandalorian Series 2, Episode 8, where it was like, holy shit, all these years, and we've been saying, well, Boba Fett is a badass. We're sure he's a badass. Yeah. We just never saw it. But we know he's a badass, you know, and even in Empire Strikes Back, when Darth Vader says to him, no disintegrations, you're like, oh, what has he done there? You know, he explicitly called out Boba Fett as if, like, you know, stop taking it too far.
Yeah.
And just we hadn't seen anything up until that Mandalorian episode. And then with this series, he's sort of dropped down a level again. And you're like, well, I can see that your principles, you like animals, you're sort of a generic hero now.
Yeah.
You know, you're not even an anti-hero, you're just a hero.
Yeah, he says edge taken off. Like, Din Djarin is actually now more of an anti-hero than Boba Fett is, because he's killed. You watch him kill loads of people in Mandalorian. But the last thing I'll say before we wrap up is just, I was talking to Jack about this because he asked me for my opinions, and one of the things he brought up was like, it's a bit annoying that Fennec Shand seems to keep bailing Boba Fett out of situations that he can't do anything. And now this answer I'm going to give, which I gave Jack, is a bit of a cop-out answer, but it's that Boba Fett in this episode mentioned he wants to be in a tribe. That's the flashbacky thing, and that's how he kind of half convinced Fennec. Yeah. He was like, you want to be in a tribe. And I think the main overall point of Star Wars, or the main message of Star Wars, is generally that if you have friends and family together, you'll beat anything. That's what the rebellion was about. That's the whole original trilogy thing. Every time there's insurmountable odds against people, but they have bad intentions. They don't really care about each other. They have no loyalty to each other. They are just fear. So as soon as the fear goes away, there's nothing left. So with Boba Fett, he's kind of realized this, and he's kind of be like, right, I want people to be with me and work with me because they want to, not because they have to. And if you have that element and you give people a choice and you allow them to, then they're more willing to stick by you, just like Luke does with his friends and stuff. Whereas no one who worked for Jabba wanted to work for Jabba necessarily, apart from the money element. But once you got brought in, you couldn't escape. And then any chance to get out of Jabba's grasp, you would take, including betrayal, which lots of people tried and failed at. So I think that, although the Fennec Shand thing is like, oh yeah, Fennec seems to bail him out of everything, maybe it's a case of, yeah, working as a lone wolf won't always work, and you need someone to have your back. And I want to clarify, I really like Fennec Shand. I think she's quite cool. I at the moment, I think she's almost in some ways cooler than Boba Fett. So,
well, I think she is, isn't she? She's that hired muscle, that right hand bodyguard almost. And I think it's just the problem that, you know, Boba Fett was supposed to be the badass, and that's fine to step back. But I almost feel like, well, it would have worked better if there were, let's say there were 4 of them, and, you know, he was almost assuming that Jabba the Hutt role where he doesn't get his hands dirty anymore. You know, he's evolved beyond that. But it's always Fennec who bails him out. And I don't know, was it you or was it someone else? I think I might have saw it in our Discord group who put that, like, Fennec Shand is the one who complains to McDonald's that they got the order wrong.
I put that in there. Yeah. Yeah.
I thought that was pretty good.
I saw that on Reddit. It was excellent.
It is. So it just, maybe when he's got Black Chrysanthemum on board, you know, at least he's got 2 there. Yeah. So he's got 2 bits of muscle. But when it's always, it feels off. It feels lopsided.
Yeah, a bit unbalanced. Yeah, because he mentions, oh, you're the brains and the muscle. And it's like, well, at the moment, she seems to be not only doing most of the thinking, but
why
also,
isn't she running?
Yeah. Everything? So, if she's so good, she could probably do you in a fight. Like, she seems to be badass and saving your ass for everything. You just seem to have resources and notoriety and really fancy armor. That's, at the moment, that's the main thing you have over her. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful that these episodes, the next few, are going to be the level of badassery we saw in Mando from Boba Fett. I think that's what it's building to, and I hope it is. I wonder if they're going to really hurt Fennec or maybe kill the Rancor or something, and he's just going to snap and go mental, which is what I want.
I want to know, where is it going? So when Danny Trejo popped up and he dropped the Rancor off, and with you saying about Rancors being really docile, I'm now wondering and looking back at that scene in Return of the Jedi where he kills one off a little bit differently. maybe they just starved it, but it's just like a hungry dog, you know, he just needed to eat, Luke, you bastard. But Danny Trejo seemed a little bit nefarious, didn't he? A little bit nefarious. He was saying, oh, yeah, we'll see how this goes, kind of thing.
Is that just because Danny Trejo seems to play a bad guy in 90%?
Well, maybe that's it. Could be that. But there seemed to be something more than...
Could be.
It seemed to linger in a bit of a sinister way.
Yeah, and then the Hutts gave it to him, and you're always a bit like... The Hutts often play the long game, so it's a bit like... If Danny Trejo's on their side, and it's a bit like, oh... The Rancor's meant to like you, but really he's faithful to Danny Trejo, not actually to Boba. So maybe it is. But we'll have to see about that. So we'll wrap up now. I assume is there anything else to add before we just plug our social media?
No,
stuff?
Like I say, it sounds like I've been shitting on it for an hour, but I did still enjoy it. I still really enjoy the series. Even if I'm picking nits out of something, I'd much sooner have this than not have it. If there was Mandalorian / Boba Fett, if it was just a day in the life in Tatooine weekly, I would be watching it. So, you know, I am still absolutely loving it, even though I do pick holes in it here and there.
Yeah, and I'm the same. I want to clarify. Like, I think I love many, many things, but that doesn't mean one can't critique them. And to address my comment I made right at the start when I was talking about Star Wars fans bitching about things, I think there's a difference between saying, there's a problem with this, I still enjoy it, but I think they could do this better, rather than going... This has ruined the whole show. I hate it. I can't see why they ever do it. Yeah, they've ruined Boba Fett. Disney once again have spoiled Star Wars. It's like like there are elements which feel Disney-fied, but I wouldn't say they've ruined anything because I'm still enjoying it. And if the show ends and I don't enjoy it, as I said, I think the last episode, I just probably won't really watch it again. If it doesn't pick up from, if episode 4 is the peak and it doesn't get any better than this, I'll still finish it. I'll have enjoyed it, but I won't go back and rewatch it. So we'll see about that. But Dave, it's been delightful chatting with you as always. Why don't you tell people where they can find you, and then we'll wrap up.
Yep. So you can get me on the TV and Movies podcast on this feed. So we'll be covering Peacemaker episodes 1 to 3 next on that. So that's a lot of fun with John Cena picking up from the Suicide Squad. You can also get me on the VHS Strikes Back and Chris and Dave's Reality Cast as well. All those different places. We are at some point in these next few weeks going to finish off our recap of The Office. So we were going to do the David Brent Life on the Road movie. It's just we didn't commit to a time, and so it's meant as each week passes, it's like, oh, I know we've got to do that, but we've got to do all these other podcasts as well. So we will get around to it at some point.
Stellar. And I always say, I do listen to VHS Strikes Back. I listen to whenever it's a movie I've seen, I'll listen to it. However, the most recent episode with Cage, you don't need to have seen that film. To listen to you guys talk about that was cracking me up. It was so much fun. You know about Lou Ferrigno, who got shot in the head and then survived, and then all this other nonsense. That was a really fun podcast. So if you want to hear some nonsense about that,
here's the thing. So you've got the actors who played the Hulk and Captain America in this 1989 action movie. Now, that hasn't happened again until Avengers Assemble in 2012. So absolutely crazy. And then there's all these kind of lower level actors that you recognize from, other things. Like there's a bad guy. I think he was from Hawaii originally, but he's cast as like a martial arts bad guy. He's in like Lethal Weapon, Die Hard, and all these things. If you watch Lethal Weapon, he's the guy who's electrocuting Riggs with the kind of sponges. Loads of background characters like that where you're like, oh, he was from Die Hard, or the guy who owns the Nakatomi Plaza, he was in it as well. And it's just bonkers. I'd never heard of it. It is the worst movie. It's terrible, but it's so brilliantly awful. It's a must watch. But I'm pretty sure about 1% of our listeners would have watched that movie. But Chris, once he got the bit between his teeth, he absolutely wanted to do it. And I'm glad he did.
It was great fun. I'll include links to that in the description as always. And then you can find me on social media at Genuine Chit-Chat, and if you're listening on the feed of Comics in Motion, there's my Star Wars show every Saturday, Star Wars Comics in Canon. And if you're enjoying this show, then you should really go check out my Star Wars show. Check out my War of the Bounty Hunters stuff, because that's loads of Boba Fett stuff that you probably didn't know all about, and I give bio information, go through the plot details of the comics, so you don't have to read them if you haven't. But if you have read them, I give a lot of additional information, so it's still a great refresher. So make sure you check that out. If you're listening on YouTube, then hello. Go check out the playlists of Genuine Chit-Chat and Star Wars Comics in Canon, because everything's in kind of genre playlists of stuff, so you can just listen to Darth Vader episodes, or The War of the Bounty Hunters, or High Republic, whatever. And please subscribe to the feed of Comics in Motion, and also my YouTube channel if you're listening on there as well. Links to both will be in the description. But yeah, thank you so much as always for listening, guys. We've got 3 more episodes of this to go. Got some plans for that as well. A couple of other people who haven't yet been on these Book of Boba Fett recap things, so it's quite exciting for that. And